Joining me now, Scott Neal, a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, perhaps more accurately described as a veteran of our special forces. He Skypes in this morning from Tampa, Florida. Scott, do you agree with Senator Graham's assessment?
Well, I do actually, and it's kind of interesting. We have already built solutions previously for the last 5 or 6 years to counter this activity, and what we've seen is this dismantling of this capability and this effort to shed ourselves from these wars, and we now find ourselves flat-footed.
Senator Graham's comments were more in the context of what was going on the battlefield and geopolitically within the area of the Middle East. Now we see terror back in a Western nation. In France today, at least two hostage situations as we look at the scene live outside that Paris deli, and we see the air assets, the helicopters flying over both situations. Do you believe we might see this mushroom later today with yet another incident in France?
Well, what we're going to see is we're going to see our friends in Al Qaeda and any other startup start to use this as a social media rally cry. And if you just look at what's happening right now, you have two brave jihadi warriors against thousands. And it just emboldens some of these, whether it's a lone wolf or a brotherhood or a group of people determining the fantasy of what they could be and a hero they could become. And that's what you're going to start seeing more of.
Indeed, as we make reference of the earlier situation that unfolded this week at the French humor magazine, the satirical publication Charlie Hebdo, you had the Kouachi brothers. Now they're holed up in a print shop in the industrial park within the vicinity of the Charles de Gaulle Airport. Reportedly, they have a hostage, and Scott, they have told law enforcement they want to die as martyrs. With that kind of intent, that kind of passion, do you think collectively things will get worse before they get better? Will this be the incentive that will have more Islamo-fascists poised to strike via terror here in the West?
I actually believe so, and we kind of mentioned and talked about this earlier, is it's happening more and more often. And those are all the signs, signals, and indicators of, these kind of acts inspiring others. And whether they were in early stages of planning, this kind of accelerates and climbs onto what they ultimately want, which is the social media aspects of this, the boost in recruiting and funding, the carrying of the message, and you just can't contain it. Right now, it's at a portion where we're just observing it and we're not ahead of it. We're just falling behind it.
To the nuts and bolts of these endeavors, and I hate to use that term because it almost sounds as if it mutes what we're seeing here, the attacks. Today, apparently, a couple of incidents involving hostages. Are hostages a complicating factor in terms of bringing these people in or ending these situations safely with the chance of saving everyone, a diminished loss of life?
It certainly does, because in a lot of the jihadi articles online and their own training, they understand the West's sympathy for hostages, and it changes their tactics and procedures. It really slows down the pace of a counterterrorism operation, so much so that it adds an element of even more media consciousness. And then when you have a hostage that may be killed during the exchange of fire, like you saw in Australia, then you start to question the resolve of the police. Did they use the right tactics? And you're no longer fighting the jihad, you're fighting internally amongst yourself, and they have another win.
Scott, 2 minutes remain for our conversation. If you were boots on the ground today dealing with this kind of situation, to the extent you could tell us what you would be doing, what would that be?
Well, one, I would be isolating the exact sectors that they're in that building. Number two, I would make a commitment, a decision tree of exactly what we wanted to achieve. Also, I would be watching all the social media and messaging coming in all the areas, because you start to see other cells accelerating their planning or copycatting as well. So you just can't stare inwards. You also have to start looking outwards for other activities.
So, and this is an interesting dimension that social media brings to the situation. Surveillance on the streets, but really heightened surveillance of the internet and the chatter that now is so commonplace and goes hand in glove with these terror organizations. A minute left, sir.
I think that's really the Sun Tzu and the dagger in all of this. You know, we look at the immediate incident, but really it's magnified 500 times in the social media and in the cloud. And this is such a propaganda boon that if we don't contain this, and there really is no task force that attacks the social media aspects, it should be disrupted right now, just as much as we don't have cameras telling them which door the assaulters are coming in.
Fair enough. You have given us indeed food for thought. Scott Neal, Special Forces veteran who saw action in both Iraq and Afghanistan, Skyping in to us today from Tampa, Florida. There is more ahead on America's Forum, but what has turned out to be a very busy news day with a pair of developing stories from France command our attention. Therefore, we return to our South Florida Newsmax TV newsroom and get this update from John Bachman.